silver lining of this past year of Zoom is that it humanizes us all.
I
You know,
know. Yeah.
I've spoken to, well, I'm thinking of one example, the head of $1 billion advertising company who was in his kitchen and his daughter was screaming at him. So,
Oh.
so now I know he has a teenage daughter and I know what his kitchen looks like, which I never would have known.
Definitely. So I see more and more people are joining in, so let's not waste any more time. And while I do my introduction, I believe more friends will already be in the loop. Good morning, good afternoon once again, everyone. And Dorian, I'm Cemre, the UN representative of the Journalist Emeritus Foundation. Nice to meet you once again, and welcome to the JWF's Media and Communication webinars. This is the second year of this program where we invite experts to share their field experience with the media and communication students and young professionals from all around the world. It's a global program. We have participants from 9 countries. And since the beginning of this year, we have hosted great experts to talk about financial stability of journalism, citizen journalism, freedom to access information. And today we will be listening the role of digital media in society with you, which is a very contemporary and important topic. And I would be very glad to introduce Dorian Benkoil to everyone. He has a quite distinguished background, but I will do my best to summarize the highlights. So Mr. Benkoil has more than 2 decades of experience in digital media and in traditional media before that as well. An award-winning journalist and MBA. He's the co-founder and principal of Teaming Media, as a managing producer at abcnews.com, general manager at Fairchild's Production Publications, internet division and editorial director for various websites. He created new content and strategies to lead to expansion in their growth. He devised and taught courses in the media, business, and technologies at the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and Baruch College as well. He has taught more media, marketing, and technology business classes at the graduate level at Fordham Universities and Columbia School of International and Public Affairs and many other institutions. He's also an award-winning journalist who has been with the ABC News, as mentioned before, Newsweek, and the Associated Press. He's a frequent source for media and business publication and outlets. Dorian is a graduate of Communication and International Relations Department of Stanford University. He has also passed a government proficiency exam in Japanese and speaks French. Dorian, is there anything else that I didn't cover? Wow, such a wonderful
No,
background.
I'm a little embarrassed. I feel like you've been talking to my mom, but
No, no.
but thanks for saying all that. So I mean, yeah, I have a slide actually. I was going to say, but thank you for that. And if I appreciate it. I think we can get started, and I can sort of put some of what you said in my background in context for today's.
Sure. Just a very
So
small reminder before you start. Everyone, please write your comments and questions in the chat box like we always do. So when
yep,
he wraps up, we can direct them to Dorian in the order. And please, if you're available, just open up your video cam to have a better communication. Dorian, please, the
yeah,
floor is yours.
I would even. I'm sorry. You pronounce your name Chemra?
Jemre.
Jemra.
Yes.
So I would just say the only other uh, the only slight adjustment to what you said is feel free to ask questions in the chat or even talk with each other in the chat during my presentation, and we might even get a chance to interrupt. I'll probably ask you some questions, ask you to solve some things, so it can be more interactive than just me speaking and you typing. We do have to manage the time, but so feel free. So I will share screen right now if I may. And so you're also welcome to raise your hand via the that function in Zoom, if that's available to you in the level of Zoom you have. Um, but I will say that when I start presenting, there's a good chance I won't be able to see that because it takes over my screen. So if I will try to keep the chat window open, I may not be able to see the hand raised, but you're welcome to do that too. So let me share screen and sorry, here it is. I'll start the presentation and we'll get going. So um, my computer's been a little slow today, but there it is. So, as we said, you know what this is, and I just wanted to quickly go over what we covered, and then a little bit about who I am and the perspective I'm going to give. So, I just want to, set a framework for us. We'll talk about history, uh, and the way things were, and then sort of the way it is now and where it's going, and then bring in some of those flashpoints and tensions. As it says here, this is from the perspective of my field of expertise. Yes, I have been a foreign correspondent. Yes, I have lived other places in the world and have a somewhat international background. But I also my work is primarily these days in the United States, and that's the perspective I'll bring. I also teach from the perspective of a media business operator. So I'm going to do this largely from the perspective of somebody who teaches and speaks about, and in fact manages a company that deals with uh, publishers and media technology companies. But the framework that I'm going to present is valid internationally, and it's also valid from many other perspectives, as I hope we'll see. I already was given a wonderful introduction. Thank you from that. The main point being what I just said, the business orientation, in addition to the journalistic background and some international background. Um, so I'd like to talk about, you guys have already had your three presentations that led up to today, and I feel in a way that this encapsulates some of what you've already learned from those three wonderful professors. I noted that there will even be a little bit of overlap from your first presentation in today, although I presented in a different framework. Um, and one really way that I've found that is a very good organizing principle and a way to look at media is to look at it in terms of the content value chain, which you can see here I've abbreviated as the CVC. This is one that my colleagues and I have adapted from one that was originally created by the IBM Media Research Consultancy. But there are a number of them around, but the main point being that it's not that hard to understand. It's a way to look at media organizations and say, what are they doing and how do they do it? Or if you're managing one, how am I going to manage this? So it's a value chain, which means you go along the chain and you create things. So that means you have to have the stuff that people are going to consume, media audiences. Creation can also mean acquisition or aggregation. It may be stuff you get from elsewhere, but you will present it to people. Then you have to manage it, and that is an especial challenge in digital today because there's so much that you have to manage, and a lot of the management comes down to technologically managing it, handling multiple assets and multiple things from multiple places. Distribute it. How are you going to make it available to people? How are you going to make it so that they can access it? Once it's available to them, how will you let them know that it's available so they discover it? That's awareness. And then finally, if it's going to be financially self-sustaining, which if you're running a media organization, it has to be financially self-sustaining wherever those funds come from, that you do have to find a way to sustain it financially. So how will you monetize those assets or make it financially self-sustaining? Sometimes the goal of a media organization is activation, which means motivating people to do something. For example, a political organization may want to motivate people to vote a certain way, political media, right? But for the purpose of this discussion, I tend to frame it in terms of um, financially self-sustaining. And then you're going to measure and take actions along the chain, depending on what you see, that gets you toward your goals. And then you have ethics, legal, and regulatory issues running along the bottom, that in an instant can influence any part of the chain, and if they change, can change any part of this. If we'll touch briefly on some of what's going on in government and regulation right now, but those of you who are familiar with Europe, probably have heard of GDPR and the privacy regulations and have noticed how that's changed the way media operates and behaves. We're having similar regulations both from government and industry, restrictions or codified behaviors in the United States, and those are changing the way media companies operate, and they therefore force change along much of or all of the content value chain. So that's a way to look at it. And if we look at media historically, we can see that, previously things were in previous decades, decades ago, probably before many of you were born, or maybe in the early parts of your life, there was fairly limited and controlled media operations. The creation was controlled and went through certain aspects. It was fairly expensive to have professional level tools that could create stuff. The managing the content wasn't that multifaceted as it is now. It was pretty set and known, and you knew how people were going to consume things, and what kind of form factors there were, what the patterns were, what the times were. You knew that if you sent it out and if you made people aware of it, how you were going to do that. There were a finite number of channels, limited number of outlets. It was clear what those channels were. They were distinguished and separate from each other. The business models were clear, and also the legal and regulatory framework tended to be fairly stable. There were certain laws and regulations, and those frameworks tended to stay and apply throughout. And very importantly, the consumption, both the distribution and the consumption tended to be passive, and the distribution tended to be unidirectional, right? And this was a time when in the United States, nationally speaking, you had three major TV networks that reached the vast preponderance of homes in America. You had a few very prominent newspapers, a couple of prominent news magazines. I mean, this isn't everything that existed, of course, but there were basically major outlets. And a very important implication of that was that the media controlled that creation and dissemination of information, and that meant they also had the means to reach people, whether you considered them consumers or voters or some other constituent that you were trying to reach or influence. And that also meant that if you were a politician or somebody trying to sell something who wanted to advertise, or someone who wanted to reach people in that way, you largely had to go through these media, whether you were a politician being interviewed or an advertiser buying commercial time or things like that. It was very limited, controlled, known, set, and as a publisher, that very much influenced the way you were able to operate and behave. Excuse me, I'm a little chilly. I'm going to just close my window here. So, so that's and then, but today, of course, that's been very busted up and changed, right? It's barely controlled. As a publisher, you certainly can't control the media universe, even your own media. It's virtually unlimited, right? Anybody with one of these has a very powerful media creation machine, and many, 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 many people do. And it's multi-directional, right? It's not from us publishers to them consumers, and they're no longer, consumers are no longer passive. Everybody is participatory and spends a lot of time. It's very common for people to be creators as well as consumers. So, and you can go through and read these one by one if you want. There are a few very important wrinkles. One is that with content management, you're taking on new challenges as a publisher that you didn't have before, right? Because you have previously, you would create the thing, distribute it, and then it was done. Now you end up having to manage the archives and the assets, which may be on servers in all kinds of different places in the world. There are new kinds of distribution, right? This idea of many to one, or people plus machines, is new to digital. And the distribution awareness is very fragmented, right? You never know on what kind of device, what screen, how somebody is going to consume what you create, what you put out there. You know, they may be, it might be as simple as, are they holding their phone like this or like that, landscape or portrait orientation. You don't know what time, you don't know whether they're going to be in a room at home or a busy shopping center or an airport. You just don't know. And the ethics law and regulation are in flux and tend to be constantly changing, trying to catch up with the changes in the media and the technology. So you've got all this flux and you've got all this fragmentation, which influences every part of the content value chain. It's pretty easy to understand intuitively and otherwise. You've got fragmentation in creation and management, right? The amount of content, as I said before, is virtually unlimited. I mean, this is a good illustration of it, and this is only 2015. I'm sure if we could extend this out till today, the line would continue upward. There are, so many devices that are available to people, in addition to the phone, the creation devices that are affordable for many, many, many consumers. The idea of consumers, individuals producing media is just a given today. We've seen that, of course, very recently in many of the issues around police shootings in the United States, even for things as sort of world events like the visit of a pope, like this was, people themselves are just becoming media creators and transmitters. So there's media from everywhere. It's virtually infinite. And then, of course, you've also got machine creation, which is a new thing. So, and this creates also challenges in ingesting, managing the media, and people are fragmented in the way they consume media. We as publishers don't know necessarily on what kind of device somebody's going to consume any media we produce. And this is just digital. It doesn't even, I didn't even include, the traditional or legacy media formats, because I could show a different chart, and I have one if you'd like to see it, of how it splits up among printed newspapers and broadcast television and cable television and terrestrial radio. And so in addition to all those traditional outlets, there's fragmentation even within digital, and the proportions tend to change, and you have to be mindful of that. Is someone consuming it on a desktop or a laptop or a mobile device or a gaming device? You're not necessarily sure. And even if you have an idea of that, you might not know other things about how they're consuming, or you might have to figure that people are consuming in still different ways. And there's more and more of this all the time, right? There are so many different devices, so many different formats, so many different consumption platforms, and then there are so many different services and ways of consuming things within that. So that again raises the challenge for you as a publisher. Then you say to yourself, okay, so I'm a publisher, or I'm a politician, or I'm an advertiser, and I want to reach people. So, okay, tell me. I'm not going to reach. I'm very seldom am I trying to reach everyone for everything. I want to reach a certain type of person, which would be called a demographic group or a segment. So just tell me, how do they consume, right? How can I understand? I want to reach, you know, women, mothers of school-age children, or urban women with higher incomes, or professional men interested in sports who tend to be between the ages of 30 and 49. So can I at least know, okay, this is a way I can reach them? So you can say, okay, well, some, maybe, not totally sure, but I know that younger people tend to be more available on social media. So, okay, great. I'll use social media. But even that isn't simple because it fragments further. You can see how, if you actually break it down into these more finely grained demographic groups, you get more finely grained breakdown of who's watching what, when, where, and that really makes quite a challenge for you, as I say, as that media operator, as that political person, as that advertiser, whatever you are, however you're trying to reach people. That the options are growing and larger, and every year these things even change in their proportions, and you see that TikTok isn't even on there because in 2018, uh, this was early 2019 when this was done. TikTok really wasn't an issue as it is today. Whoops. I think I still have you for some. There we go. Thank you. I hope you didn't lose me when I lost the presentation there for a sec. So there's all kind, and then sometimes even within a social medium, this is Facebook, there's fragmentation. So let's say you produce media and want it to surface on Facebook to people. Well, if they're conservative, maybe they'll see it, but if they're more liberal, maybe they won't. Or likewise, what if you want everyone to see it? That becomes a challenge. You don't control that distribution. And if you look at that reading series I sent by Tony Hale, with whom I'm friendly, just full disclosure, um, if you read what Tony wrote about Facebook and how they've the center of power in his content value chain, in his representation of the content chain, has shifted to Facebook. They now control distribution and awareness on their platform, and you as a publisher can try to influence that, but you really don't control it. And of course, as the audience has moved, as there's been this fragmentation, so too have the funds, right? The money shifts and changes and moves and morphs and melds as the eyeballs do. That's, we say that in the industry a lot. Where are the eyeballs? And it also, of course, we don't say this so much, but where are the ears, right? So the money does as well. And first, I thought it would help just take a look at the general split. This has changed a bit. The audience portion is a little bigger today, but this was the most authoritative source I have that's reasonably up to date. And you can see that the preponderance of funding for media comes from advertising. Uh, Another large portion of it comes from direct payments from audience. I presented a resource for you about the Daily Memphian in Memphis, Tennessee, which is a not-for-profit local news organization that is largely audience funded, meaning they sell subscriptions in addition to some grant funding that they have. And then there's other ones, and philanthropy and venture capital is just a little bit. The Pew Center grouped them together on this chart. Um, you know, they're obviously very different in nature, but they're still a very small portion of media funding. The largest point is advertising. So if you are a publisher trying to sustain your operation, you say, okay, advertising is a big way to do that. If I'm in digital media, is that good news? Well, if you look at this chart, which is by the AAB and Price Waterhouse, a consultancy, you can see that it looks like it's really good news for you as a publisher in digital media, because if I'm publishing in digital, the advertising money is going into digital. So I'll create media and I'll get some of that advertising revenue. But this doesn't tell the whole story. And again, I guess worth full disclosure, my company has done some work for the IAB. Doesn't influence what I'm saying now, but if you search hard, you'll find some things that say teaming media for the IAB. Um, so so it looks like okay, good story. I'll create media, get it to be ad supported. But one of the issues is that you're competing if for a thin sliver, unless you're Google and Facebook in the United States. This was an analysis done by Digital Content Next, which is an organization that largely represents major media publishers. And the analysis they did found that of that revenue, the types of revenue we saw on the previous slide, that advertising revenue, Google and Facebook take up most of that. And so other publishers and media organizations are competing for this sliver. And then even within that sliver, it's very concentrated. So, the top 10 media companies take up a huge proportion of it, and the top 25 companies use up, virtually, all of it, a very large preponderance of it. So if you're not one of those top 25, um, you're competing over a small amount for advertising. And let me ask you, you can answer in the chat. I actually can't see the chat screen, so I'm going to minimize the presentation to try to pull up the chat screen for a sec. Let's see, I've got some chats. Um, Sam, thank you. May I call you Sam? You say Samuel, I'll call you Samuel unless you tell me to call you Sam. Um,
I prefer Sam. I just use the full name for formal stuff. Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. I mean, I wouldn't want to call people by their preferred name. Word of news. So I'll address the podcast issue in a sec. I mean, we can actually talk about many individual media or mediums, um, but um, we can talk about podcasts in a second. I actually do have slides on podcasts too, which I could pull out and find. But they're a sliver of this. They're a slice. They're not a huge slice, but they're part of it. Uh, you know, to be honest, the issue for you as a publisher is always what's your particular situation. Meaning, if you are a podcaster, can you run your operation and also have it be financially self-sustaining? It's good to know how much potential revenue there is, or what kind of operations there are, things that are available to you in the universe of media. If you're running a podcast or a podcast operation, those questions become much more pointed and specific to you. So, if there is, even if there is, only, uh, you know, a smaller amount available to you, um, maybe if you can capture a sliver of that smaller amount, that's still enough to run your operation. But we can talk about podcasts in a sec. Um, I'm going to maximize the presentation again. So I think that might make the chat disappear. So so if you're a, so so the point. But anyway, so think about, who do you think are the companies in the top 10 or even the top 25? And you're welcome to write it in the chat if you'd like. Which companies do you think they are? We'll have a slide at the end that kind of reveals who many of them are. But, who would they be? And therefore, if you're not one of them, can you get access? How is it harder for you to get access to those advertising resources? And then another question I have for you is, okay, so if advertising isn't available to you, what are some other solutions for you if you want to have a, you know, financially sustained media company? What other kinds of revenue are there? Right? What other kind of resources? What other kind of sources of funds are there? So thinking about that for a sec. And please feel free to throw it in the chat if you'd like. If you don't, if it's not advertising, what else have you got? Or speak up if you'd like. It's up to you. I don't mind. So I'm a media company. I'm trying to support my operation on advertising. Turns out maybe advertising isn't enough. I can't pay for my staff, pay for the servers, pay for the resources, to pay for the
Would it be
telecommunications.
subscriptions?
Sure, subscriptions. Sure. Brian, I see that you've asked about the ethics behind sponsored content. Sponsored content certainly is another way. That is a form of advertising, but we can talk about the ethics of that. And in fact, I may have assigned. No, I didn't, but I can send a couple of readings about that. I actually was interviewed on an NPR show called On the Media about that. But yeah, there are about that very issue, the ethics of sponsored content. Subscription, right? Exactly. So a couple of you have said subscription, which is exactly right. Another way to refer to it is direct revenue from users. That's a larger category, of which subscriptions, of course, is a big proportion, right? Subscriptions, people pay you directly for the media you produce, whether they do it via subscriptions or what might be called membership, whether they buy it directly, as in, people pay to get a movie on demand or buy a book, or they pay directly, or sometimes there are micropayments. There have been a lot of experiments with that. They don't seem to be successful yet. A micropayment would be, for example, rather than you buying the entire issue of a newspaper, you pay to read one article. You maybe the organization gets 25 cents or something like that. There have been experiments with that that hasn't worked. So, Melanie, I see your question. That's my question back to you is, what is unbiased news, you know, and even you could even say what's truth. That that was basically the subject of my Fulbright in Tokyo, and um, but uh, it's a very difficult question. I'm not sure um, how to answer that, and I don't want to get too far into that right now. So if we have time, let's try that at the end. Um, Ironically, or fortunately or unfortunately, sometimes the more biased news is actually the more profitable news. But let's go ahead. I heard somebody's mic come on, so if somebody has something to ask or say, okay. Um, so there are direct revenue streams that you have. They include um, uh, subscription per purchase, membership, um, you know, temporary rights, which is on-demand downloads, things like that. You have a lot of other revenue streams that you can try for. I'm not going to read through all of these. I've shared a slightly previous version of this presentation with Ezra, and Ezra, you're welcome to share that PDF with everyone. I'd be happy to give you this updated one too. I just edited a few things, but you have lots of other ways of earning revenue. And as Julie, who was the CEO of Business Insider, said today, you pretty much have multiple revenue streams. And I'd be happy to talk about any of these. But these are some of the ways that you can support your operation. So to recap, I've set the stage here, right? If you're a publisher, you have to manage this content value chain, which has all this fragmentation, all these complexities. You're competing in multiple more ways against multiple more um, distribution channels, media organizations. There's not that clarity and delineation among media now, where you have sort of TV here, radio here, and sorry, I just wanted to make sure. I'm going to silence this. I was thinking perhaps whatever text I got was relevant to this, but I'm going to assume it's not. So you're managing all those things along the content value chain as a publisher, right? You've got the competing interests, the multiplicity of content, the multiple distribution outlets. You're juggling all that. You're trying to figure out, how am I going to get this all paid for? How am I going to, which of these revenue streams am I going to choose? And then we have all this fragmentation, all these issues. This past year, I think it's worth just mentioning COVID-19. The media industry has taken a huge hit. Um, so the way that while media consumption increased, especially news consumption, some news organizations had a lot of trouble sustaining their operations and they went out of business. Some have improved, but and I've put up a few links in the. I'll show you here. I put up a few links in the presenter notes, which you'll get if you have the PDF. And there are also just tensions and changes that you have to balance against. One is kind of an ethical issue of balancing privacy versus revenue. If you're a media operator, the more data you have on someone, the more money you can make. Because I can either tell my advertisers about who the audience consuming my media and information is, I can tell them more. The advertiser always wants to reach a certain kind of person that they think will want their product or service, and you can say, well, we have those people and this is how to reach them with ads in this part of the website or app or whatever. There's audience targeting and technologies. I don't think we need to get into that, but the point is, the more data you have, the more revenue you can earn, the more money you can make. But at what point are you going too far, right? At what point are you going too far, collecting too much data about people, learning too much? When do people, and if you flip that equation around, when you're the consumer, how much data am I comfortable giving up, right? Do I want someone necessarily to know, without me explicitly telling them, my gender orientation or my sexual orientation, gender orientation, marital status, religion, religious practices, family status, all those things are very health status, very personal. But as a publisher, if you know those things, you can better serve media to that person that is relevant to them, not serve them things that are irrelevant, and also have your advertising pay more and serve more relevant ads. So there's really that tension there that you have to balance. There are a lot of initiatives, laws, regulations that are coming about, some of them very recently. Here, these are both linked to articles. If you click on them later, you'll be able to read about not only the government regulations that are uh, have come into or coming into play, but also the ways that industry is trying to address the privacy issue, and how by Google, Apple, and others doing this, that is changing the way publishers are going to be able to behave, and advertisers and others. And so within all of that, there's an issue of tracking and targeting. The better I know someone, the more I can serve them. If I serve them what they want, I do better as a media company. But by doing so, am I doing the right thing? Do I end up serving so much in news and information, entertainment, etc., that's so tailored and targeted to different groups? Is there even a common point of reference for people? Is that even my concern? I don't know. But that's something that to think about if you're in the managerial ranks. A couple of you said subscriptions is a good way to earn revenue, and I say, yeah, some media organizations can try to make a go of it. It's not easy to do so for reasons I can explain, but if you get to subscription levels that are sustaining of your organization, that can be a very good business model. To do that correctly, though, you have to know something, to track people, to know who they are, so that you can serve them the media and the information they want. And that means that you have deeply personal information about at least the media that your subscribers are consuming. You might know everything like how much they use whatever device they have, which internet browsers they have, what their core topics of interest are, right? That lets you serve them the media they want and is relevant to them, for which they're paying and therefore will keep paying. But again, there's that tension, right? So you need to track people to be able to give them what they want and be financially sustaining. How far will you go with that? And of course, if we're going to talk about tensions, we have to talk about the tensions between publishers and platforms. You may need Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, TikTok, et cetera, to make sure that people are aware of the media you have, to distribute some parts of your media, to reach the people who you want to reach. But by doing so, you're also relying on them, ceding control to them, becoming beholden to them, and you have to do the things they say. So I just thought, as a final couple of slides, I will say, I asked you before, who are the major media organizations that might take up the top 25 of that previous chart I showed in advertising. This isn't an exact representation of them. Some of these are not major advertisers, but these are what Recode Media put out a little while back of the major media companies, primarily in the United States, and their relative strength on a financial basis, and also the major media operations that they're involved in. So this was their representation of that according to their market capitalization. And then Jason Kint, who I'm friendly with and who is, again, just kind of full disclosure, is the head of Digital Content Next, that publishers organization I mentioned before, said, well, actually, guys, you're misrepresenting where the power really sits in this universe, because that's how it really should look. So if you put Alphabet, Google's parent company, and Facebook and Amazon and Apple, you can see that any of them individually dwarfs any of these media operations, and the power in the universe in which we operate actually holds with them. So now I want to again ask you guys a question, which is, what are the implications, right, for media executives, if you're a media executive, for creators, right, which a lot of you are or will be, and for those who previously might have had to come through us to get their information out there. So as a publisher, politician, or advertiser, what would you do, right? As a publisher, what would you do to make your media organization self-sustaining? As a journalist or producer or creator, how would any of this influence the work you do? And can you use the media? And if you're a politician, or an advertiser, what would you do? What will you do? Will you go to media organizations anymore, or will you just go directly to Facebook and Google and TikTok and so on? So that's the end of the prepared presentation part of this. I do want to ask you guys before we go today to just take a quick survey. I've prepared this. I will share this in the chat myself. So you can just click on that and just say, what you got out of today, and if you choose to answer a few other questions, and I'd be grateful for that. But why don't we turn it over to the discussion part now? Let me see. I saw some things running through the chat, so let me take a look.
Actually, I can assist you if it's okay with you in terms of the questions. I see the list of questions. Maybe Brienne can start.
I see them too.
She's saying she's curious about media ethics behind sponsored content. Brienne, do you have any other comments that you want to add to your question?
Not really. I work on a managing team at a student newspaper, and this was just a conversation that came up because we were looking for alternate forms of revenue, and we weren't sure, like, all these random offers for sponsored content. Where's the line,
Well, let me ask you, what's the tenet of the discussions you guys have had?
We're concerned that, like, we don't want people to question the integrity of our coverage, and we want to make sure that our content is still catered and geared towards our audience. So, like, college students and maybe alumni and local communities. So we just want to be careful about that.
May I ask which organization? If you'd rather not say, that's fine. But
yeah, I work for the Statesman, Stony Brook University's campus newspaper.
Yeah. Have you guys? So you guys haven't made any come down with any sort of principles yet, or anything like that?
No, I think that we moved on to discuss other alternate forms of revenue, but we get we still get a lot of those emails, and it's something that I think about a lot. So
yeah. I mean, I actually have a whole part of my one of the courses I teach at the graduate level is a significant segment of that day's lesson is on this very issue. But and I'll make an offer to you and anyone else in that survey link that I just said. There's a part where you're not required to fill it out, but it's kind of say anything else you'd like. So in there, you're welcome to ask, hey, could you please? Here's my email. Could you please send me some stuff? Or you could also hit me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to share it on LinkedIn, because I've written a bit about this issue, and there are other places, things. I mean, this is something that I have some experience with on both sides, meaning I've, and the clearest quick guidance that I've come up with is it's very important to have clarity and separation. So clarity in terms of if this is sponsored content, you need to say that and say it clearly. You need to say it clearly on the thing itself. Like if you say, on the homepage, sponsored content, but that links to an article and the article itself doesn't say that, you're doing a disservice, because a significant amount of traffic obviously today comes in directly to the thing through search or whatever else. And then the second thing I said was separation, meaning if possible, if you are able to sustain this, it's best to have a separation between your editorial organization and your commercial content operation, right? You want to have a delineation there. There can be discussions between the two, but it's best if you're able to have, the sponsored content producers in one place and they can physically work in the same room, but I mean, conceptually in different parts of the operation. And then, there are other wrinkles, which are sort of decisions you have to make. Are we going to put them in the same content management system? Will we optimize the sponsored content for search in the same way that we do our editorial? And, a dozen other sort of simple yet gnarly questions that, come up with that stuff. But I mean, like I said, what I said was sort of the basic principles. And if you do, hit me up, I'd be happy to send you the links to a few other things that could help you get started and go down that rabbit hole of sponsored content. So thank you for the question.
Thank
Does
you.
anyone else have anything to say on that? I mean, this is not a settled area. So I'd be happy to hear if anyone else has a thought.
I think
I
it
mean,
really depends. Oh, sorry, Dorian.
Go ahead, Melanie. I apologize.
No, that's all right. I think it really depends on the content that's being sponsored. I don't think it's like an end all be all kind of overarching answer. I think it's specific to every industry, whether it be fashion, if you're covering fashion or covering health, or it's kind of, it depends, I feel like, and that's what makes it so difficult to make a solid answer.
That's actually a really good answer for this stuff in general. At ABC News, after, I was the founding international editor at ABC News Digital, and then I became the one of two managing editors, and then I moved into sort of a liaison role between editorial and business. And in that final role, I ended up navigating exactly what you just said. Like it's not a it depends, right? Like this story about a water crisis in the Palestinian territories is different than this story about Americans going to the beach on Labor Day. They're not the same thing, and they're not the same section. They're not, so, and it's, you have to have core principles, but it's not always in the middle. It's not always absolute. It's hard to, you have to make decisions. Yeah. Yeah. There were some, did you want to read any other questions, Shemra, or?
Yes, I do have some more, but I think Samuel just raised his hand. If you want to make it quick.
Oh, sorry. I don't know where it's going, but something came to me while we were talking. It's like the people who you'd be most worried about, depending on your topic, if you're like if you're a topic focused publication, like not this is not for general stuff like the New York Times or Time Magazine, but like say if you're, I don't know, Vogue, the people who are most likely to want to put sponsored content and most likely are willing to pay to put sponsored content in your outlet are those who you'd be most worried about their money affecting what you say, because they're involved in the topic you report on. And it's like you can't really send them away because they're the most likely ads because of course you're both talking about the same topic from different ends of it. Of course they're going to be making ads in your outlet, but it's like the more focused you are, the more you have. It's the problem that I don't know how to resolve.
And it's a hard question to resolve. I mean, the ultimate answer, and this also answers a question that Joe asked: to what extent can you maintain professional objectivity when you're paid for the content you produce? You know, the hard answer is you kind of have to have a spine, meaning you have to be able to be willing to say to an advertiser, part of the reason you want to advertise with us is because of the great work we do journalistically. And if we bend those principles to accommodate what you're asking in this instant, we will then be doing damage to the very thing that our audience values, which is the reason you're advertising. And ultimately, sometimes it comes down to, are you willing to say, as a journalist or even a manager, to say no, to quit, to fall on your sword? There have been instances where I've been asked to do things where I was like, I don't really want to do that, but is it worth? Okay, here's an example. I mean, this is a literal example. I was in charge of a few different sections. It's long enough ago that I can just say it. It doesn't really, I don't think I'm disclosing anything that's, I do have to sign non-disclosure agreements in many instances, but this is a case where it's, so I was managing, various parts of abcnews.com. And there was we were running low on the advertising impressions. We had to make sure to serve more ads to reach our necessary. And so I was told to have the team create slideshows of celebrities. And, you know, it was summertime, so it was celebrities in bathing suits, right? Which was in a photo slideshow. And if you do a slideshow, every time clicks a new slide, as you've seen yourself, there's a new page with a new ad, right? So, and because it's celebrities in bathing suits, people are, ooh, you know, they click through and they want to see it, right? It wasn't, you know, great journalism revealing, you know, something necessarily important to the world. Was it damaging? Was it something that I thought, you know, I had to say no because, you know, no. I mean, there were people whose job it was to report on entertainment and celebrity. And so, you know, that's sometimes it's like that, right? It's like, you know, because I didn't want us to not, because let's say you don't meet your financial goals, and that means that somebody has to be laid off because, you know, you've lost 40, 50, $60,000 and that's someone's salary. I mean, I have literally had to lay people off as well, you know, and that's very painful and very hard. You know, you sweat as much as you sweat bullets when you're trying to double source a story or, you know, get the facts right, or answer a politician or a government official or a PR person. uh, you know, as hard as that is as a journalist, it's really hard when you have to meet payroll and meet your expenses. Um, and it's a juggling act. But ultimately, to have the principles, if they're really principles, you have to be able to say, we won't do there are certain things we won't do, even if it means it costs us that much. I actually have an essay, um, from a magazine that science fiction writer Isaac Asimov used to run, but it says there are some cases where we won't take advertising, and if that means that Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine doesn't exist, so be it. But we won't do those things. You know, so it can come down to that. But very often it's more like Melanie and I were discussing. Um, so I see more questions in here, Shimmer. Should I do it, or do you want to read them to me, or it's up to you?
Melanie has her hand up. Maybe a quick reflection on what you said, Melanie.
Yes, Dorian, just you just said about the pain of laying people off, and this kind of bounces off of that. But as a journalist, how do you handle that? How do you handle the pain of, you know, laying people off, but then also the rudeness and the rejection and the gore and the turmoil that journalists have to face on a day-to-day basis? How do you deal with that trauma?
You mean if you're, so this is not a business question.
I guess it's not. I mean, sort of. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's an
I
issue.
was
I mean,
rejected yesterday. I tried to interview a source and she was very nasty to me. So I'm just wondering,
Yeah,
and you
well,
said like the pain behind laying people off. So I'm just wondering,
yeah,
how do
yeah.
you balance, and are you able to sleep at night when you have to lay people off, and just the business and the kind of the nasty side of journalism?
It comes with the territory. I mean, you know, it's hopefully you have an organization that has some support for that kind of thing. But it's not easy. You know, honestly, the answer I have is to understand that it comes with the territory, that it's not personal to you, and that you have to take care of yourself, meaning the classic stuff: eat well, try to get some sleep. You know, because, you know, and sometimes much worse than that. You know, it's hard to see uh, blood on the street where somebody's just been crushed by a building. You know, that's personal experience. It's hard to be with a colleague who, you know, just came back from the World Trade Center and is covered in dust after it collapsed. It's hard to, you know, and it can be traumatizing. You know, there is training for how to keep your professional wits about you in those situations. The hard thing is afterwards when you're you know, so dealing with it. You know, it's a very hard discussion, and that you know, there are professionals who deal with that. That's not my area of expertise, but I just know from personal experience that, you know, a good organization has support systems for that. And if they don't, then you have to figure out how to take care of yourself in the best ways you can. Sorry,
No, thank you for that. I like that it's part of the trade. I like having that.
it is. It is.
Yeah, and the last part of the discussion was really covering Joe's question as well, and you have already touched upon it. But Joe, if you're available, please unmute yourself. Is there any other comment that you want to add in terms of professional objectivity or any other additional question?
No, thank you. I thought it was well answered. It could not be captured fully, obviously. I thought it was well answered. And I'd let other people raise questions or comments if they have. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think the very last question that we really didn't cover is the Samuel's question. Samuel, do you want to raise it yourself?
Well, I see the targeting and tracking by Melanie and Sam. And please do fill out the form, folks, if you have them, if you have a moment. I mean, you don't have to do that right now, but you know, the chat's going to disappear, so you would need to grab the link right now. Yeah, is targeting and tracking by advertisers a violation of privacy? Well, the new tenets being laid down by Google and Apple are limiting the amount of tracking that can do. So again, it's a longer discussion, but simply put, a lot of advertising on the internet, a huge majority of it, in fact, is via third-party cookies. So a cookie is, the little piece of code that's dropped into your browser or device when you access a web page or a page within an app or something like that. So the cookie is that. Now, if you go to a publisher, New York Times, Washington Post, whatever, and then Washington Post and New York Times puts a cookie on your machine, that's a first-party cookie. But then there are advertisements, and those entities also put cookies. Those are third-party cookies. So you're essentially, by going to the Washington Post and clicking OK and whatever, you're saying it's okay to track me with that first-party cookie. It's okay for you, Washington Post, to drop a cookie and know what pages I'm looking at. But you haven't explicitly consented to this third party tracking you. And there can be dozens of those third parties tracking you through that page. And that's what's being limited now. Google is saying they're not going to pass that third party cookie information through. Apple says they're going to require disclosure, so you'll see a notice on, so maybe some of you already seen them on your phones where you get a notice, is it okay for us to track you? So is it a problem that they're tracking? Well, the industry and government officials seem to be coming down on the side of it's a problem to the degree it's done now and the ways it's done. So let's make it more explicit and consensual. And there's a lot of discussion. It's very much not decided. I was working on with an executive last week about something that I'm helping him write, and an advertising executive, and he was talking about, the article talks about all the flux, like it's not even decided. That's what his article was about. Like, what should we do? Here are some principles, because it's not decided yet and it won't be decided for at least months. So the question of, is it too much? The consensus seems to be, yeah, it is, but where do we have to go to solve that is not decided yet. And it's even different in Europe than it is in the US right now. It's different in California than it is in other states. Even different states have different regulations. Does that answer? Does that sort of get at what you were trying for, Melanie? I mean, is it a problem? And you too, Sam?
I think so.
Yeah. So, Shemra, I'm not sure where we are, but
I think we covered all the aspects raised in the chat box. Everyone having the chance of meeting Dorian. Any other last comments or questions as we wrap up the program today? All right then, Dorian, thank you so much for this
All right.
meeting.
Oh, actually,
Oh,
oh,
Aaron.
hi Dorian. Thank you for your time today and all your wonderful insight. I just wanted to know, would it be okay for us to connect with you on LinkedIn for any further insight or
Yeah,
questions
yeah,
we have?
yeah.
Awesome.
Yes. I actually say that in the survey. You know, please,
Oh, okay.
if you want to continue to be in touch, leave your email address and or connect with me on LinkedIn. Either way.
Okay,
and
awesome.
we have a WhatsApp group as well, so Esra can just copy and paste the link to the WhatsApp, so people
Sure.
fill it out later on too.
Yeah, I have WhatsApp, but I turned it off because there's a group in my building that, you know, we all have so many apps, and I
Yeah.
get notified. I get notified too often if and I don't have the time or the patience to carefully modulate each, but yes, you're welcome to connect with me on WhatsApp, and I'd be happy to discuss that way. But I also, unless I'm dealing with an international client, don't use it that much.
Sure, I see.
So,
Well,
just because, yeah. But yeah, no, WhatsApp is fine if you want. That's fine, especially if you are overseas. I understand that's often the best way. If you're not in the U.S., that's often the best way to do it.
yeah, definitely. It's a reality of today's communication. We have
Yeah,
WhatsApp as a signature
Yeah.
app for overseas communication.
yeah. And with Chinese people, I use WeChat. So you use what you have to.
So it's their own app. I
WeChat
get.
WeChat is kind of the Chinese WhatsApp, kind of. Yeah.
They have their own version for everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's also usually government monitored. So if I don't want to get someone in trouble, I have to be careful.
Yeah, I see
That's
that.
true. That's true a lot of places.
Sure.
Some. Yeah. I don't have to name countries.
Yeah. We have discussed pretty much some countries with some restrictions on access to information. Anyway, that's another whole world on the restrictions. Dorian, thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. And
Yeah. Thank you guys.
as a farewell as well, thank you everyone. This was our last session in the series of webinars, and we'll be always in the loop in touch over the WhatsApp as well. I believe some of you are keeping up the work with the journalism projects. Esra is already following that up. Esra, any other reminders or last words you may have?
Yeah, thank you so much. It was my pleasure to meet you all, and I would like to thank you for attending the all webinar session. You successfully completed. Thank you. I wish you all the success in your career and in your life. Please keeping on the working on universal peace and for more freedom. And I just would like
Just
to
a small goal.
small goal.
Universal peace. But it's a good goal.
Yeah, it's a good goal. Yeah. I would like to share some program with you. I think it is a good opportunity for you. The United Nations Department of Global Communication, in partnership with the UNESCO, organize a virtual celebration of World Press Freedom Day, entitled Information as a Public Good, on May 3rd, Monday. They announced a call for questions to university students who can submit their questions to the speaker for their response during the World Press Freedom Day interactive dialogue. They will choose around 5 to 10 students to ask their questions to the panel at the virtual event on May 3rd from 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. The student must be available at that date and time in case they request to speak. I will share with you the question submissions link here, and the deadline to submit questions 27 April, next Tuesday. This is a good opportunity for you guys. If you have interested, please go to submission link and ask your questions. The link is here. And also at the same day, we have a virtual discussion promoting an independent and pluralistic media virtual discussion series as well. on Monday, 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. On the third anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration, we will discuss how to promote and stretching media ethics and the rule of media and democracy with our expert and the young professional. We are looking forward to have you at the event, and please feel free to share with your network. I think I sent the flyer, but I will share again the flyer and more details with you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Stay well, safe, healthy. I hope to see you all in other occasions. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorian. Have a
Thank you.
good
Bye-bye.
yeah.
Thank you, everyone.